Up to this point, in our series on the book of Revelation, we have looked at the first chapter of the book, and this is where John introduces his series of visions. And we saw that he uses already in the first chapter language and imagery from the book of Daniel. And we saw from the very beginning of this book that the visions were political. So the message was that Jesus freed his followers from sin in order to make them into a kingdom, their own kingdom of priests. Priests serving not the emperor or the empire's pagan gods, but Jesus and the one true God. And then, kind of counterintuitively, maybe, we jumped ahead to chapter 13. And that is where John describes his vision of the two beasts. So we learned that in the book of Daniel and in other apocalypses of that time, beasts usually represent kingdoms or empires that are threatening the people of God. And that in John's apocalypse, the first beast stands for the Roman Empire and its demand for total allegiance. Last week, Chris led us through the second half of chapter 13. And that is where the second beast rises up out of the earth. And that beast symbolizes sort of the different institutions throughout the Roman Empire that pressured people and that coerced people into worshiping the first beast. So today, we're going to backtrack one chapter to chapter 12. And remember that we jumped ahead to chapter 13 for a particular reason, and that is because the beasts are really the immediate threat of the early church. Those two beasts are the occasion for John's visions. That is what the immediate conflict is with those beasts. But in chapter 12, we are shown the conflict that is lurking, I would say, like behind the beasts. So we see what gives the beasts their power. So that's what chapter 12 is. And because we're looking at a longer passage, I'm going to read it in sections. You can probably see that it has 3 sections or scenes. So I'm going to begin with the first scene, and then I'll make a couple observations. So this is Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. A great portent appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them down to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child who is to rule all of the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. So, little decoding is in order here. Yeah, pretty clear. So this scene opens with a woman in labor. And it does seem pretty clear that the child who is to be born is Jesus, the Messiah. There are different interpretations of who exactly the woman represents. It could represent Mary, Jesus's literal earthly mother. But the commentators that I read are pretty sure that the woman is actually the personification of the entire people of God. The community out of which Jesus is birthed. So this would be the people of Israel, and it would also include the followers of Jesus or the church. In the vision, the woman is clothed with the sun, the moon is under her feet, and she wears a crown of 12 stars. So the mention of the sun here, along with the dragon, is important. And that is because there is actually, I'm gonna ask, is anybody like really good with their Greek myths? You do? Does this one ring any bells? Like a woman and a dragon? No, yeah. So the Greek myth that this seems to resemble is the story of Apollo's birth. So Apollo, the god, was associated with many things, probably the most notable being the sun. And in this myth, before Apollo was born, his mother was threatened by a serpent dragon called Python. And so soon after he is born, Apollo finds Python and destroys him. And Roman emperors, they really liked portraying themselves as Apollo. So Caesar Augustus was hailed as a new Apollo who ushered in a new golden age of peace, supposedly. So John's vision, in a way, challenges that myth, and even turns it upside down to show that actually the emperors are not Apollo, the emperors are not the hero of the story. They are actually agents of the dragon. So the woman, along with being clothed with the sun, she's standing on the moon, and this is likely kind of a dig at the goddess Artemis, the moon goddess. And her temple was in the city of Ephesus, and that's one of the churches that John is writing to. And the crown of 12 stars signifies honor, and also probably either the tribes of Israel or maybe Jesus's disciples. So the fact that she is clothed with the sun, that she's standing on the moon, she's wearing a crown of stars, all these details suggest that she is a noble figure, that she's a powerful figure. And this is important because it really contradicts how the Romans portrayed the Israelites. Chris mentioned last week that the Romans used their coins almost like little billboards. They used their coins essentially to spread propaganda throughout the empire. So coins often had scenes or iconography that honored the empire, that honored its successes or its rulers, and they especially liked to commemorate their successful military campaigns. So there is a coin that Rome created after they destroyed Jerusalem in the year 70. After they did that, they printed a coin with a woman under the woman, she is identified as Judea. And she's seated kind of in submission in kind of like a humiliating pose. John's vision portrays a very different woman representing the people of Israel, right? She's ennobled, she is honored by the sun, the moon, the stars, all elements of God's creation. So in this first section, when the woman is threatened, she escapes into the wilderness. And I think that's a pretty clear allusion. Wildernesses show up in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament, actually. Moments in Israel's history where God protected them. So the most notable being God taking them into the wilderness after freeing them from slavery in Egypt. And it says she is given safety there for 1,260 days. 1,260 days is 3.5 years, which is a significant amount of time in the book of Daniel. That's the length of time that the world will be in distress before the end comes. So the number is not literal, it's a symbolic number for a time of upheaval. Let's take a look at the second passage now. This is chapter 12, verses 7 through 12. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaiming, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our comrades has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. But they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they did not cling to life, even in the face of death. Rejoice then, you heavens, and those who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you with great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." So this scene depicts a war in heaven. The archangel Michael, who is traditionally known as Israel's protector, he and his angels defeat this dragon in heaven, and he casts them out down to the earth. And after this happens, there's this voice that sings this song of praise, sort of like a Greek chorus. It interprets the battle. And the voice says, "Now have come salvation, the power and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Messiah." And this is really the heart of the conflict. The dragon does not accept Jesus's authority. He will not worship him. And in fact, Satan sees himself as deserving honor and worship. This is actually why I think it's in the first passage where it mentions that he has 7 heads. Each of those heads is wearing a diadem. Where did I go? And a diadem was kind of a headband or a kind of crown that signified royalty. So when Satan wears these head dresses, it conveys a certain level of arrogance and a desire for authority and power. But Michael and his angels defeat them in heaven, and Satan is banished from heaven and the heavenly court. Let me back up. Before he is banished from the heavenly court, the voice proclaims that Satan has been cast down and can no longer accuse, the voice says, our comrades before God. And this is a reference to what is called the heavenly court. So according to certain traditions, there is this court in heaven. Satan was a member of the court, and his role was to point out people's sins to God, almost like a prosecutor would do. Or he could tempt people into sinning, and then he would go and report their sins to God. And actually, the name Satan in Hebrew literally means the accuser. But now he has been banished from heaven. He is not part of the royal court or the heavenly court anymore, which is good news. But the voice says, woe to the earth and to the sea, because now the dragon is coming down to you with great wrath. And that brings us, to the third section of chapter 12. This is verses 13 through 18. So when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time. Then from his mouth the serpent poured water like a river after the woman, to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman. It opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. And then this leads us to, then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. So the dragon pursues the woman on earth. Again, she escapes into the wilderness for a time and times and half a time. Again, a reference to 3.5 years. Now, as she escapes, the dragon kind of belches this river at her, lets loose a flood of water to try and drown her. Normally, a river in the desert would be good news, a blessing. But here it is a curse. And actually, at the end of Revelation, we will see not a cursed river, but God's river of life flowing through the city. But here it's a curse. And the use of the word, I think, flood seems important, because it's as if Satan kind of desires the authority and the power to judge and to punish. Similar to the flood in Genesis, that God rains down on the earth. But here, instead, the earth, an agent of God's creation, works against Satan, and the earth swallows up the flood. And so Satan pursues the woman's other children on the earth, the ones who keep God's commandments and who hold the testimony of Jesus. So that's sort of some brief annotations about the text. I hope they're helpful. But the real question is, what do you do with all this? What can this story teach us? I'll mention a few things that I think are significant, and then we'll take a few moments to reflect. The first observation is that this story, I think, has sort of a strange plot structure. You have all this joy in heaven at the defeat of Satan and the dragon. There's a hymn of praise and thanksgiving. Now have come salvation, power of the kingdom of our God, authority of the Messiah. Satan has been thrown down, right? This is a triumphant, joyful moment. And yet, the earth is still in turmoil. The conflict rages on. Evil is still at work. Evil still feels strong, almost eternal and invincible. But this isn't true. John calls Satan the deceiver, right? Satan wants to project strength. He wants to project authority. But as John says, he rages on earth, not actually because he is strong or has power and authority. It's because he knows his time is short. He has already lost the true battle. And this would have given John's initial readers or listeners hope, right? Evil does seem strong. It does seem authoritative. But this is actually a lie. What seems strong is actually desperation and weakness. Second observation is about Satan as the accuser. And Satan yearns for the authority to accuse us of sins, to make us feel ashamed of our humanity, to make us doubt that God would love us despite our sins. Satan thinks he has the right and the authority to judge us and to punish us. And he tries to do this, but it is actually deception. It is Jesus who is the Messiah. It is Jesus who is the just judge, the merciful judge, compassionate, forgiving. And it is through these characteristics that he has conquered, through his own blood given on behalf of humanity. And I think Satan clearly hates this self-sacrifice on behalf of humans. So Satan is the deceiver, he is the accuser, and Jesus is the truth and the redeemer. Final point I'll make is that in this hymn of praise, the angel says, but they have conquered him, meaning the martyrs have conquered Satan by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not cling to life, even in the face of death. So they have conquered Satan through the sacrifice of Jesus, through accepting that sacrifice on their behalf. And they have conquered Satan by the word of their testimony, even in the face of death. They have conquered their accusers not actually by killing them or by going to battle with them. It's by holding the testimony of Jesus even in the face of death. The martyrs have not failed, in fact. They have not been conquered, just as Jesus was not conquered by death. Jesus conquered death. And so the martyrs have prevailed because they held not to the world's deceptions or the lies of Satan and the Roman Empire, but they have held on to the truth of Jesus. We don't have much time left, but in this couple minutes, I'd like you to think about this question. Does Satan tempt or harass you with false accusations?